Welcome, and thank you for joining the channel. I hope you enjoy several stories about skinwalkers accompanied by rain and thunder. There are no ads on this video, and if you have any stories you would like me to share on this channel, comment below and your story will be featured in a video. Please help this channel grow by liking and subscribing. We really appreciate it. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy these encounters with skinwalkers. Let's begin. Before I begin, I would like to say that this is a very long story. It's been something that's haunted me since I was 6 years old. Since my first encounter with it, I have had dreams about this, and 2 very specific encounters with the creature. I'm sharing this story so I could possibly find help on what to do or how to get rid of this creature that's been haunting me since I can remember. Just for background, I'm a 21-year-old female and still worry about this creature finding me, but I'll get into detail on why later. For now, here's my story. I would always go camping with my grandparents, who I call Gammy and Gampy. At the end of my school years, I would always look forward to it since I grew up loving the outdoors and the woods. I especially loved camping, loving the idea of having s'mores, taking long hikes, being around the campfire, and of course, the wildlife we could see. Now, I grew up in California, mostly near cities, so the forest was like my true home to me. I always preferred being near trees and dirt rather than buildings and crowded places. Besides, the woods were much quieter and more peaceful. I always felt safe when I was there, like nothing could ever hurt me. But something strange would always happen at the end of the month of May. I would have this recurring dream during the last week of my school year. I would be in the woods, walking alone down a dirt trail. The woods were always strangely quiet. I would continue to walk this path until I saw this red fox poke its head from behind a tree. Its eyes were always strangely human-like, but they were yellow and somehow looked like teddy bear eyes. And it would just stare at me. It wouldn't make a sound at all. It would just watch me. Usually in my dream, I would go up and pet it, that making the fox finally made a noise. Usually a soft growl. Then I would continue walking, and it would follow me. The first time I would have this dream was when I was actually around 5 years old, and it lasted until I was like 11. Over the years, it would be the same exact thing. I would walk in the woods, find this fox, pet it, then continue my hike with it along me. But about having this dream for the 4th time, it started to walk behind me. That's when I started to feel uneasy about this fox. I could hear it making odd noises, but every time I went to look back, it was just walking like nothing was wrong, even somehow giving me a smile. Sorry to go on about a dream, but I now believe that it was a warning of this creature. Now that the dream is out of the way, I can talk about my first true encounter. I was 6 years old and I was going camping with my granny and grandpa for about a week. Of course, I was very excited for it, being able to barely keep myself in my seat for the last day of kindergarten. They had picked me up right as the bell had rung and already had the camping trailer attached to my grandpa's truck. I remember he drove an old red truck that only had 3 seats, me always being in the middle. It took about 2 hours to get there and another good hour to find our usual camping spot. It was deep into the woods and far from other people, as my grandpa wasn't too fond of being around other people while we camped. As they were setting up the camping trailer, I wandered around the campsite, loving to dig in the dirt for bugs. I had sat down on the dirt and started to dig, but I noticed how strangely quiet the woods were. It was never quiet, not even in the dead of night. I thought it was odd, but being only 6, I didn't think too hard about it. As I continued to dig for bugs, however, I thought I heard my grandmother call me. She would usually call me Sugar Booger, that being a nickname she gave me since I was born. That's what I had heard, but it sounded like she was very far away and somewhat sick. I looked up where I heard it coming from, that being from the woods, but there was no way she was there, because she was still unloading stuff from the truck. Even at the age of 6, it didn't feel right. So I walked closer to my grandparents and stayed next to them. I soon forgot about my weird encounter though, as we began to have fun. For the rest of the day, we played card games, sat next to the campfire as we ate dinner, and stared up into the stars. I always loved seeing the stars. There never being any where I lived. We started to get sleepy around 9 p.m. I believe, and we started to get ready for bed. There were bunk beds that me and my grandma would sleep on, keeping our luggage on the top bunk, and we would sleep on the bottom bunk. Due to my grandfather's snoring, he would sleep on the couch of the trailer. I would always sleep next to the trailer window just in case I couldn't sleep and wanted to look outside. I fell asleep pretty quickly though. That being the last day of school and all, it was pretty exhausting. I remember waking up maybe hours later, it still being pitch black outside. It wasn't weird for me to wake up in the middle of the night, since I always had sleeping issues. I rolled onto my side and tried to fall back asleep until I heard it. Sugar Booger. My eyes immediately shot open as I heard my nickname being spoken, but I knew it wasn't either of my grandparents. They were both asleep and never were known to sleep talk before. I started to feel this horrible feeling in my gut, like whatever I was hearing wanted to really hurt me. Even at the age of 6, I knew this wasn't normal. Then I started to hear tapping on the trailer window. It was soft, but loud enough for me to hear it. I just sat there, frozen in fear. I was trying to just brush it off as tree branches or rain, but I just knew that wasn't it. I could tell that it was really someone, or something, tapping on the window. Then I decided to be brave and look. Big mistake. I pulled the curtain away to only peek, and all I saw were these large yellow eyes. They seemed glassy, yet not entirely real. They looked like giant teddy bear eyes, but cold and unwelcoming. I remember in that moment I panicked and quickly closed the curtain back up. I then hid under the blanket, that being the only thing I knew to do when I saw a monster. I could feel tears running down my face. I never had been so terrified in my life. I just curled up into my Grammy's side and clung onto her all night long. That damn tapping only got louder and more persistent throughout the night. I don't remember falling asleep, but somehow I did. I don't remember my grandfather waking me up around noon, saying how if I got up quick enough, we could still go fishing. I honestly didn't want to leave the trailer at all, terrified that whatever I saw that night before would be out there. I did eventually go outside, but I was constantly looking around, horrified that whatever I saw that night would come and get me. My Grammy immediately knew I was scared and pulled me into a hug when she saw me, asking what was wrong. I did tell her what I saw and heard, and surprisingly, she believed me. The next thing I knew, she was telling Grampy that we were going to move campsites. It took a bit to convince him, but he did eventually start to pack up and hook the trailer onto his truck. I was put into the truck so I could properly sleep, but I just couldn't. I kept feeling those eyes, and I kept feeling like I was being watched. thinking that every little noise was that thing I saw, that if my eyes were closed even for a second, it would get me. My Grammy wasn't too far from me when I heard it again, but this time it was my actual name, Aaliyah. In that moment, I had never seen Grammy move so fast. In that moment, I had never seen Grammy move so fast. She looked up into the bushes where we heard it, then to me. She then got in the truck with me and pulled me into a tight, protective hug. I began to cry all over again, telling her I wanted to just go back home. That's when Grampy got into the truck as well, and since I was sobbing so hard to the point I was coughing, he agreed that we can go home. We started to head out of the campsite, still hurt that this trip had been ruined by something, but I still don't know what it was. That's when something in my head told me to look back. I slowly did, feeling an ice-cold fear wash over me as I saw something, a red fox, sitting in the middle of the campsite, sitting there with large yellow eyes. The same fox from my dream, somehow curling its lips into an eerie smile. After that encounter, we never did go back to that campsite. We did continue to camp, but in more populated areas. I didn't tell my grandmother what I saw, but she told me to trust my gut. She knew that I was sensitive to certain entities, and that it would help me if I trusted it. Now this would be the end of the story, but I'm afraid it isn't. There was one more encounter I had with the creature, and it was much more terrifying than the first time. The second encounter I had was when I was 17. Many years later, by this time, I knew very well what a skinwalker was now. And I was still very paranoid every time I went near a wooded area. I still worried about seeing the fox, but I never really thought about it too much. Me and my 2 younger siblings were staying at a relative's house for Christmas, them living way up into a mountain area. I think they were my great aunt and uncle, but I'm not too sure where they lived. There was no service at all, so unless we hooked up into their Wi-Fi, we had no phones. I didn't mind the house, still loving the woods no matter what happened. Although at night I hated how they didn't close the window curtains, making it easy to anything outside to see inside. But I did feel safe while inside the house, knowing that they wouldn't let anything hurt us kids. Luckily, it didn't snow where they lived, so we could go outside and run around. They also had this beautiful black lab being about a year old, named Pam. She was very playful and normally wouldn't listen to anyone but my uncle, although she was easily excitable. She was a good puppy. One of the days we were there, my little sister and our aunt went to the store for a nice girls' day. Although I'm a girl, I wanted to go hiking with my uncle and my little brother. We left pretty early since the hike we were doing was 4 hours of walking into town. It was a really chilly morning, but since we were doing so much walking, it felt great. We also decided to take Pam, it being a good way for her to get exercise and have fun. About maybe an hour into our walk, I started to slow down a bit. I wanted to enjoy the beautiful forest. It was so peaceful. I could have honestly stayed there, but as we continued to walk, I started to feel something odd. I noticed how quiet the forest was, and suddenly our uncle and Pam noticed it too, her ears going straight up and growling softly. I started to pick up the pace to go next to my brother, worried that possibly a coyote or a mountain lion was nearby. I knew though that they wouldn't be out at this time. Even if they were, they didn't walk near the roads. My little brother was only 9 at the time, and being the oldest sibling, my natural instincts to protect him kicked in. My uncle noticed the silence as well, telling us to stay close to him and Pam, who was now next to me and still growling. I began to feel that horrible feeling again, that ice-cold fear I only felt when I was 6. I tried so hard not to think about the creature, but it was all I could think about, and it was worrying me. Seeing my shoelace came undone, I quickly knelt down to tie it back up, trying to hurry and just trying to get out of there. That's when I heard it. Aaliyah. In that moment, my heart dropped into my stomach. My eyes were wide, and I could just feel myself starting to shake with fear. It was right next to me. I heard it clear as day. I slowly turned my head, and there it was, the same red fox, still having those horrid yellow eyes, and that same demented smile. Only this time, I saw it more clearly. Its fur looked so matted and disgusting. The smell it had was like rotten, decaying flesh mixed with garbage. Its limbs were much too long for a normal fox, the back legs bending completely the wrong way. Those eyes were still the worst thing about it, but they looked emptier than I had remembered. I wanted to scream, wanted to run, to cry, but I just couldn't. I was frozen, as I was too scared to even blink. Then I heard it again. This time, however, it mimicked my brother's voice. Found you. Before anything else could happen, Pam suddenly jumped in front of me and started to bark like mad, snapping and growling so aggressively that it scared the hell out of me. It scared me out of my trance. When I looked back, it was gone. I used the moment to run over to my brother and uncle, who didn't see what I saw as they were too far ahead now. But I heard my uncle start to pray and sing a song under his breath, keeping my brother and myself close to him. I was too scared to even look back, so I just kept my eyes on the ground and refused to stop walking. Pam had stopped barking, but she was still loudly growling and never left my side as we continued our hike. My little brother was a bit worried, but he just thought it was a coyote. When we finally made it into town, my uncle had called our aunt and told her to pick us up, saying that something about how it wasn't safe for us to walk back. Thankfully, she did come and get us, but she was confused since we talked about that hike for days. On the car ride back, Pam never left me alone. She was right beside me the entire time. She knew that thing was after me, and she protected me. I was very grateful that she was with us. Who knows what could have happened if she wasn't. When we got back to the house, I was talked to by my uncle and aunt. Once I told them what happened and what I saw, they had started to pray and check all of the locks that were shut tight. My aunt putting something around the doors. I now believe it was probably ashes, but I never did find out. Unfortunately, this made our Christmas vacation cut short, as they were worried that I was not safe while still in the woods. We had to be taken home the next day, them making an excuse of how there was an emergency with a friend and that they wanted to help them out. I felt horrible that this Christmas was ruined, but once I did leave the woods, I truly felt safe again. Before they had to drive back home though, they told me that it wasn't my fault, and that luckily it didn't hurt me or any of the other kids. It did make me feel a little bit better, but I still brought it up a lot of questions and worries. It was still around. How? Why? What did it want with me? Does it want my skin? My soul? Was I just going to be tormented by this thing forever? I still don't have answers to these questions, and that's what really scares me. Now, I've long moved from California and now live in Kentucky. I do live in woods, but so far that thing hasn't found me. I know that seems very stupid on my part, but life had changed a lot since when I was growing up. I was given no other option to live somewhere else, and my grandpa in Kentucky was kind enough to let me live with him. So please don't call me an idiot for moving to the woods when I had no other choice. Anyways, while I'm happy it hasn't found me, I'm still worried. Can it still find me? Is it hunting me? I'm not close to anyone who truly knows on how to get rid of this thing, and that's why I'm telling my story here. So, can anyone help me find, real help? If anyone can, please. If there's anyone out there who does know, please help me. Let me start off by saying that my wife doesn't really believe in paranormal entities or anything of that nature. We have 3 cats, and one of them likes to be a rebel, jumping onto corners and counters and any moving object really, and meowing at the top of his lungs just looking for attention. He does this throughout the night, and it's a regular occurrence. Last night, after a few beers and video games, I decided it was time to head to bed with my wife. When I woke up in the morning, my wife was basically attached to me with wide eyes and a nervous look on her face. I asked her what was wrong, and she proceeded to tell me what happened last night. She said that around 2:50 in the morning, she was woken up by a noise that sounded like one of our cats downstairs meowing unusually loud. After giving herself a few seconds to perk up and fully pay attention, she said that the meows sounded more like a person trying to mimic a cat, and it kept saying hello. After meowing for 2 or 3 minutes, a loud bang came at our door, and then a notification went off from the monitor sensor at our front door. When she told me this, I checked my phone, and sure enough, there was a notification for motion detected at 2:52 a.m. I asked her why she didn't wake me up so I could grab my gun. She said that she was frozen with fear and didn't want it to hear her make a noise. We're out running errands while I'm typing this, but something made me uncomfortable about her story. Last night, I set the home security alarm around 9 p.m., and we didn't turn it off till we woke up and took the dog out this morning. To make things worse, we had slept with all of our animals in the room, and the door was closed, so whatever was in the house or outside the front door was not one of our animals. Obviously, the first thing that came to mind was a skinwalker, but maybe I'm just being paranoid. I checked all the rooms in the house after I got up. I'm not sure what I could have done anyways. It's very odd that my wife was scared so badly by something she doesn't necessarily believe in. We bought this house brand new, so no one lived here before. When I'm home alone, I do feel like I'm being watched or someone's always walking directly behind me. My wife also said that the house has been giving her chills since we moved in. Something just felt off. We just got home, and I went to hang up one of my shirts in the master bedroom closet when I noticed that the board that covers the attic access has been shifted a little. When I asked my wife about it, she said she's never been up there, and the builders would have placed it back in their original place before we made the purchase. I'm generally getting anxious just thinking about what could be going on. Has anyone experienced anything like this, or similar at least? We're going to my mother-in-law's to get some sage. My wife said burning it should keep whatever's around the house away. If anyone knows what is going on, please answer and help us out. We really need it. Short backstory. I'm Jake, 25, and I live in a pretty big house near the forest. My grandmother would always tell me stories about skinwalkers when I was young, but I thought she was just trying to scare me. I should have taken her seriously. It all started 2 months ago when I looked outside and saw a fox screaming in pain in the backyard. I closed the window and called 911. About 30 minutes later, the animal patrol arrived, but they didn't find anything. I told them I must have been still half asleep, and that's why I saw it. I knew it was real. First, it wasn't much except loud footsteps and screams, but It turned worse in the past 5 days. I went away for the weekend so I could rest a bit. When I got home, it was there, watching me from the woods. I called my neighbor and told him what I saw. Surprisingly, he believed me and told me that he is coming over. I met him in front of my house and showed him exactly where it was. He loaded his shotgun and we got into the house to get some food and water. I went to the kitchen and packed the things we needed. When I got to the door, he disappeared. I felt something was wrong. I looked outside and there he was, eyes missing and cuts all over his body. I quickly grabbed his shotgun and turned around. It was there. Without its disguise, it was much taller than me, red eyes and deformed bones. It was smiling at me before I pulled the trigger. I screamed in pain and ran away. I called the police and told them exactly what happened. I locked my doors and windows and hid in the corner of my bedroom. About 6 minutes later, I heard it tapping on my window. I ignored it at first, but it became louder. It knew I was there. It's been an hour now. The tapping becomes more aggressive, and I didn't hear anything other than the noise in the past hour. It's been 2 hours, and the tapping stopped. Instead, I hear footsteps coming from downstairs. I think I'm gonna die. Update. The police arrived and they shot the creature. I am currently looking for someone who wants to buy this house. I posted one on another thread, but it was just too long. I didn't want to hijack the comment section of a good story. I'm dying, Navajo, and boy have I heard a lot of stories growing up on the reservation. While I've never seen anything myself, which I'm grateful for, I have benefited by being around the people who have. There's a different kind of evil that exists in the quiet, high deserts and deep sandstones canyons of Utah, New Mexico, even Colorado, in the southern area. I can only describe it as an ancient evil. Now there are helpful ceremonies, rituals, and traditions that are still practiced to this day. Hell, even a local hospital has an on-duty medicine man, but it seems to be a double-edged sword. What I mean is there is also black magic, which most dying will not even acknowledge or speak of. We are very superstitious and are heavy with taboos. You will find this with most First Nation people from Alaska to Argentina. It's just something you don't do, in fear that it will get the attention of unwanted spirits or harmful beings. Skinwalkers or Nadulis are just a few stories that kept me up at night with the covers over my head. Here's a quick one for you guys. A Navajo tribal police officer was driving west on what was frequently used to be officially named Highway 666. It was lightly snowing, maybe 1.5 inches, which is a lot of snow for home, and he sees an old woman walking on the side of the road. How she got there or where she was going was not apparent because she was so far out in the middle of nowhere. He didn't see her right away, but as he passes, he notices that she's dressed in the traditional clothing, a shawl, dress, mokans, and her hair is in a traditional bun. Not too odd, many elders still choose to dress traditionally, but why was she out here in such cold weather this late at night? Hitchhiking? Maybe. He passed her too quickly and now has to turn around, and as he makes a U-turn, he notices she is nowhere to be seen. This is fairly flat terrain, and he for sure seen an old woman walking. He pulls the squad car over and steps out with his flashlight. Confused, he manages to find the woman's footprints in the shallow snow. He follows the footprints until they suddenly turn into what looks like dog footprints leading away from the road in a hurry. He immediately jumps back into the squad car and meets up with another officer near his patrol. He's a little shaken up, but asks the other officer if he has ever seen anything like that. The officer tells him that he has. He also explains that sometimes an old woman, sometimes a very young girl, but always on the same road and always in the snow, waiting for the right, good Samaritan to let her into the car. I still get nervous driving those wide open spaces at night. I keep my eyes strictly on the road and turn my music up high. I rarely pick up hitchhikers, but I never pick them up at night. This is the story my family had told me when I was growing up. We live in a rural community on the Navajo reservation. My aunt and her 2 brothers were home alone, while my grandparents had left for the evening to attend a chapter house meeting. They were in a house, and like many people from the reservation, they didn't have electricity. It had been dark outside for about an hour, and my aunt and uncles were getting ready for bed. Outside they heard noises, as if someone moving around and moving things around outside. My oldest uncle went to look out of the front window and saw a figure out by the truck. This was immensely out of the ordinary because the closest neighbor was miles away. Whatever has opened the truck door and began to dig through the personal items that my family had left in the vehicle. My aunt and uncles were frightened by the sight and knew that they had to take action. They took out the rifle and all steadied themselves to hold it up. They flung open the door and aimed the gun at the dark figure. The figure turned and started to walk towards them, totally unfazed by the weapon. My uncle pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. The figure drew closer, and my aunt began to smell something like a rotten corpse. It was so strong it made her gag. My uncle continued to pull the trigger with no luck, and the figure came closer and closer. Off in the distance, headlights were coming up the road. My grandparents were returning. The figure looked towards the headlights and started to move away and tucked itself behind a tree near the house. My oldest uncle ran towards the truck with the gun. My grandfather got out of the car and my uncle pointed to the tree. The thing was poking its head out to observe what they were doing. My grandfather ran into the house and over to the stove and grabbed a handful of ashes and rubbed it over the gun and placed the ash-covered bullet into the chamber. He walked out onto the porch and fired towards the tree. Whatever that thing was didn't expect the gun to go off. The gunshot echoed, and the dark figure began running. My grandmother chased my aunt inside and my uncles, and my grandfather went after it. There weren't many roads or paths, so my grandfather and uncles chased after the figure. The truck was bouncing, and the headlights were not fixed on one particular spot. My uncle swears that when they went over, the headlights would hit the figure. He saw a woman. Not only that, whoever it was running on all fours like a bear. My grandfather eventually stopped the truck, and as they neared the ditch that drops about 20 feet, he got out and began to yell in the Navajo. My uncle says that he was yelling about a local woman. He yelled that he wasn't scared and that he knew it was her and to leave his family alone. A few days passed and there was no news that the woman that my grandfather was yelling about had passed. I've always been told that if you knew and if you know who the skinwalker is, say their name and it would kill them.